Good morning, my name is Romeo. I am a research fellow from the University of Turin in Italy, and today I would like to present our study that investigated the psychological impact of the COVID-19 outbreak on Italian university students. The COVID-19 pandemic induced numerous changes in daily life of every individual as a result of the measures to contain the infection, with important social, economic and psychological consequences. In Italy, as in the rest of the world, high levels of psychological distress have been found in both the general population and specific categories of workers, such as healthcare workers. Several studies have also focused on the prevalence of psychological distress in younger people who have experienced a drastic change in their daily habits as a result of the closure of schools and the university and the transition to online teaching. Previous studies have found that university students are at higher risk of developing mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. Therefore, this category might be even more at risk of experiencing high levels of psychological distress as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. The reduction of social interactions due to the measures introduced to contain the spread of contagion, the concern for personal health and for the health of family members and friends, the uncertainty about the future and academic progress, but also the financial and work-related worries may affect the psychological well-being and the mental health of university students. So, the main aim of the present study was to investigate the psychological impact of the COVID-19 outbreak on Italian university students. Firstly, we compared the levels of anxiety and depression symptoms between university students and general workers, and secondly, we examined socio-demographic factors and other characteristics that could significantly predict psychological distress in university student sample during the lockdown in Italy. The data were collected using an online survey from 19 March to 5 April 2020. An anonymized individual and the unique code to complete the survey was provided to each of those who agreed to participate in the study. A snowball sampling strategy was employed, wherein the participants were initially recruited via online advertisements and were encouraged to pass the survey link to others. The responses of 956 participants were included in the final dataset. The study was approved by the University of Turin Ethics Committee and conducted according to the Declaration of Helsinki. Participants were asked to provide socio-demographic and occupation-related information, such as age, gender, profession, marital status, and educational level. And participants were asked to complete COVID-19 related questions, health-related visual analog scales, state threat anxiety inventory form Y1 to evaluate the presence of anxiety symptoms, the back depression inventory to assess the levels of depressive symptoms. In order to explore the psychological impact of the COVID-19 outbreak on our group of university students, descriptive analysis and chi-square tests were first performed on socio-demographic variables and COVID-19 related questions. Secondly, independent t-tests were run to evaluate the presence of possible differences between university students and general workers in socio-demographic and psychological variables. And finally, two hierarchical multiple regression analyses were run to assess whether socio-demographic variables, health-related items, and COVID-19 related questions were significant predictors of the psychological outcomes in the sample of university students. With regard to socio-demographic characteristics, the majority of our university students had a bachelor's or a master's of science degree, and were not in a relationship. With regards to COVID-19 related questions, 4% of our students reported having had contact with other people positive for COVID-19, while 46% and 12% of them reported that they knew about others who were positive for COVID-19 or who died of COVID-19, respectively. The results of comparison between student and worker participants on psychological variables showed that university students reported higher levels of both anxiety and depressive symptoms compared to general workers. How you can see from this table, the full regression model statistically significantly predicts the anxiety symptom scores and explain 24 of the variants. Particularly being female, rating lower one's own health, and being more concerned about contracting COVID-19, were found to be associated with higher levels of anxiety symptoms in the university students group. In this table, the full regression model statistically significantly predicted the BDI total score and explained 14% of the variance. Particularly, being female, having a lower educational level and rating lower one's own health were found to be associated with higher levels of depressive symptoms. As far as the first goal is concerned, results show that university students reported higher levels of both anxiety and depressive symptoms than general workers. Indeed, 75% and 38% of university students scored above the cutoff point for anxiety and depression, respectively. In line with our results, the study of Odriozola Gonzalez and colleagues showed that students experienced significantly higher depression, anxiety, and stress scores compared to the different groups of employees. These findings are not surprising considering that adults tend to use more adaptive strategies than young people, and consequently they are less at risk to develop psychological distress during a stressful event. These results could be explained by the shift to distance education. Students' anxiety has been associated with the effect of COVID-19 on their studies and with their uncertain future employment. In the university students group, significant predictor of anxiety and depression symptoms were found to be being female. Our results are in line with the majority of previous studies which showed higher levels of psychological distress in females than males in student samples. Moreover, having a lower educational level was found a significant predictor for depressive symptoms. Similarly, regarding educational level, previous studies showed that first-year students reported more mental health symptoms than others. More generally, a high educational level seems to represent a protective factor against the development of psychological distress in adult individuals. Unexpectedly, in a university student sample, having had contact with others who tested positive for COVID-19 seems not to represent an influencing factor to develop major risk of psychological distress. Likewise, knowing of others who are positive does not appear to represent a risk factor to depressive and/or anxiety symptoms. These findings are in contrast with those of previous studies, which found a significantly higher risk of emotional and anxiety disorders among students who had relatives or friends positive for COVID-19 or had contact with others who tested positive for COVID-19. Our study showed that having concern about contracting COVID-19 appears to predispose particularly to high levels of anxiety symptoms, while rating low one's own health seems to be associated with a higher risk of developing both anxiety and depressive symptoms in our group. The study of Elmer and colleagues found that not being worried about one's own health, but being worried about family and friends was associated with worsening of mental health. In conclusion, the findings reported in the current study highlight the presence of higher levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms in university students compared to general workers. Furthermore, our results show that specific sociodemographic and health-related factors seem to contribute to the increased psychological distress displayed by our group of university students. During the extraordinary events associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is essential to take on students' needs and identify signs of psychological distress or risky behaviors. Our findings provide an overview of the early effect of the pandemic on students' mental health, and this data can be a useful litmus test for clinicians dealing primarily with young adults. Specific interventions should thus be employed to manage the negative effect of the COVID-19 outbreak on the psychological well-being of university students. Thank you for your attention.